The phantom footsteps. My terrifying night. The sun had set hours ago, casting the old house in a shroud of darkness. The only source of light was a flickering bulb hanging from the porch, casting eerie shadows across the cracked walls. I had inherited the house from my great-uncle, a man I barely knew. It stood on the outskirts of a small town, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. I had always heard stories about the house, tales of strange noises, cold drafts, and ghostly apparitions. But I didn't believe in such things. To me, it was just an old house, and I was determined to make it my home. It was my first night there. I unpacked some essentials, made a quick dinner, and settled into the living room with a book. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew, and the silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. As the clock struck midnight, a sense of unease began to creep over me. I heard it first as a faint, rhythmic thumping, barely audible over the wind rattling the windows. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the house settling. But the sound grew louder, clearer, as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth in the hallway outside the living room. Thump, thump, thump. I put down my book and strained to listen, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps were deliberate, methodical, echoing through the empty house. I stood up, clutching a flashlight, and moved toward the door. As I stepped into the hallway, the footsteps stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening. I swept the flashlight beam across the hall, revealing nothing but peeling wallpaper and dusty picture frames. I told myself it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but the knot of fear in my stomach tightened. Returning to the living room, I locked the door behind me, hoping to shut out whatever was making those sounds. I tried to read again, but my mind was too unsettled. The quiet stretched on, the minutes ticking by like hours. Suddenly, the footsteps resumed, louder and closer than before. This time, they were accompanied by a low, guttural whispering, words I couldn't understand but that chilled me to the bone. The air grew colder, and I felt a presence in the room with me. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps stopped right outside the living room door. I held my breath, listening to the whispering that now seemed to seep through the walls. The doorknob rattled, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. Gathering every ounce of courage, I approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. The whispering grew louder, almost urgent, and I hesitated. But I had to know. I had to see what was on the other side. I flung the door open, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hallway was empty, but the air was thick with an oppressive presence. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, carrying with it a faint, lingering scent of decay. Stepping into the hallway, I followed the sound of the footsteps as they moved away from me, leading me toward the stairs. The whispering grew fainter, and the temperature dropped further with each step I took. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. At the top of the stairs, the footsteps stopped again. I shone my flashlight around, illuminating an old, dusty attic door that I hadn't noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, and from the darkness beyond, the whispering beckoned me. Summoning my courage, I pushed the door open and stepped into the attic. The air was icy, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist in the flashlight's beam. As I moved further in, I saw an old rocking chair in the corner, slowly creaking back and forth as if someone had just been sitting there. On the floor in front of the chair was a pair of old, worn-out shoes, caked with mud and dried leaves. The whispering intensified, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and I dropped the flashlight in terror. In the darkness, the whispering became a roar, and I felt unseen hands grabbing at me, pulling me toward the rocking chair. I struggled, but the grip was too strong. As I was forced into the chair, I felt a crushing weight on my chest, and the whispering voices filled my mind, drowning out my thoughts. Just as I thought I would be overwhelmed, the first light of dawn broke through the attic window, and the voices fell silent. The weight lifted, and I could breathe again. I scrambled out of the chair, grabbed my flashlight, and fled the attic, not stopping until I was outside in the morning light. I never went back to that house. I sold it as soon as I could, warning the new owners of the footsteps and the whispering, but they didn't believe me. I don't know what haunts that house, but I will never forget the terror of that night, the phantom footsteps that led me to the brink of madness.